Joshua is a self-described recovering porn addict who to this day has appeared on over 150 podcasts, TV, and radio shows around the world, sharing his vast knowledge of first-hand experience of porn addiction with the world. And Joshua wants to promote the idea that this addiction spans all demographics and that those with the problem should seek help before it's too late. And so I'm not going to drag it out any further. I'm just going to say welcome so much, Joshua, and thank you for taking the time.
And thank you for inviting me on the show, Jonathan. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And despite your warning, I will start off by saying, who are you as an individual? You don't have to do the whole upbringing.
Yeah. Well, like you said, I am a recovering porn addict. I have been porn free and actually also alcohol free. I had both of those issues uh, back since March 20th, 2014. So it's been about 6.5 years that I've been porn free. And really, what I found was when I was entering recovery was that there was plenty of resources for people who were trying to enter recovery for alcoholism or other things like drugs or cigarettes or any of that, but there was nothing for porn addicts. I am a professional journalist by trade. I started working at a local newspaper when I was 18. And by the time that I entered recovery when I was 37, I was running my own magazine. So I've always had that journalist part of me. And when I saw that there was really no resources for people like me, I decided to start creating them. Because there is no stereotypical porn addict. I think most people picture like an 18-year-old kid living in his mom's basement who's never kissed a girl and can't hold a job. And
Right.
I'm sure there are those guys out there, but I wanted to create resources to show that anybody could be a porn addict. So I did recovery really hardcore for about 2 years. I went to a couple of inpatient facilities. And when I finished up with them, I decided it was time to tell my story and to also learn more about porn addiction, do more research, and share what I learned with people. And so that's what I've been doing for most of my life the past 5 years is anybody who will listen to me or invite me on one of their programs, I'm out there talking about this because especially with the pandemic, there are more and more people sitting in front of their computers looking for human connection. And since we all have, sexuality within us, I do a lot of talking about healthy sexuality versus unhealthy sexuality. And
Exactly. And
I've been making that kind of my mission, and I feel like that's my calling over the last few
mm,
years.
yeah, and what you said about getting more knowledge and information about porn addiction, be- it's that's my initial reaction when I found you, because um, addiction. I mean, I know like drug addiction and all those kind of addictions um, is obviously a real thing and all, but to me, porn addiction is something completely new. I actually hadn't heard of it uh, before I found you, and that's a main reason why I want to talk to you, because I find it super interesting that it's. I mean, there's obviously people struggling with it, and I wasn't even aware of it, that some people are. And so, with that said, I want to go back a little bit, because you, at some point, you realized that uh, you consuming porn was a problem. But at what point did you realize that, okay, this is not just a healthy self-care moment, it's actually starting to be a problem?
Well, I mean, I knew the moment I saw porn when I was 12 years old that it was something special. I don't know uh, if it had anything to do with what I saw on the pages of those magazines, but I just felt something in my mind I never felt before. The only other time I felt this is when I got drunk for the first time when I
Mm,
was about 14 years old. And then from that point forward, these were my two big crutches in life. And I can look at the times where my life was more stressful, the times where I was having more trouble, and I leaned on pornography and I leaned on alcohol to get me through those times. Because what happened was alcohol allowed me to numb myself to the problems, and pornography largely allowed me to feel like I had control in my life.
Mm.
Because when you think about it, the person on the computer screen or on the video or on the in the magazine, that person never says no to you. That
Right.
person is whoever you want them to be. You are the king of your world when
Mm.
you log on to look at pornography. And in those times of my life where I felt like I didn't have control over things, pornography gave me the illusion that I had control. And that goes back to being a child. I had some trauma from some abuse of a babysitter's hands where I felt really out of control. I couldn't handle that situation. I couldn't make what I wanted to happen. So I developed these survival skills that basically
Mm.
told me to try to control things. That's why I owned my own companies.
Mm.
That's why, I've always been a bit of a control freak, is because when I was a kid, I didn't have control, and something in me promised myself I always would. So in those times of not having control, I used pornography that way. And when it comes to addiction, addiction is understanding that your behavior is detrimental, but still not having the ability to stop it. When I was in high school, I remember a bunch of friends on the soccer team. We were over one of my friend's houses after school, and he popped in a porno movie, and everybody was sitting around laughing at it and having a good time and making fun of it. And I realized that I didn't watch porn the same way that these other guys did. So that was the first indication I had that something was wrong. But much, or that I at least looked at porn differently than my peers. But much like you, I never heard of porn addiction until I went to an inpatient rehab for alcoholism.
Mm.
I thought that my porn use was just an offshoot of the alcoholism. So I was at that facility for about 70 days, and several weeks into it, my caseworker said, "I think you might have something else happening here." And he had me meet with a guy that he knew who was a certified sex addiction therapist
Mm.
off campus. And this guy helped me realize that I had a porn addiction. It actually was a real thing, and that it actually predated the alcohol by a couple of years. So that's how I learned about porn addiction. All
Mm.
those years that I was a porn addict, I just blamed the alcoholism for taking me to those places of using it as a crutch. But
Mm.
it turned out it was a completely different addiction altogether.
Right. I find it. I think it's super interesting because, like I mentioned earlier, addiction is a real thing for a lot of individuals, whether it be like training or drugs or porn or whatever it is. It's addiction is a real thing, and anyone, as you try to explain to people, anyone can be this addicted individual. And still, to me, I'm struggling to understand. One part of my mind goes like, okay, so you can be addicted to porn in this case, um, but still you describe it as as a flight from reality. You're trying to escape reality, and it just so happens to be porn, and it could be any other kind of addictive uh, material, whether it be like substances or whatever it is. Um, and I guess what I'm trying to go at here is it because I'm trying to play like kind of devil's advocate.
Yeah, I understand.
Hmm.
Here's a great example that I give people,
Hmm.
especially when I'm talking to groups in colleges.
Mm.
Um, After we finish up here, or if any of the listeners want to try this, do it tomorrow morning. Tomorrow morning, when you wake up, pick up your smartphone and turn the volume all the way up. Turn on all your alerts, turn on all the buzzes and the beeps and everything.
Mm.
And then take a piece of paper and tape it across the screen of your phone so you can't see the screen. And then put the phone next to you. I promise you, within a few minutes, you're going to hear some kind of buzz or beep or something. Maybe it's a text. Maybe somebody is trying to talk to you on Facebook, or somebody's liking a photo on Instagram. But the thing is, don't look at it.
Mm.
And you're going to get that second buzz or beep. Then you're going to get a third and a fourth and a fifth. And people who have done this have found that they can only do this about 6, 7 times, and then they rip that piece of paper off because they
Okay.
need to find out what's going on their phone. Now, why do they need that? Because it's a dopamine hit.
Mm.
Every time that somebody tells you they like an Instagram photo or tweets or whatever, and you have to go look at it, you're feeding your dopamine receptors. And that's really what addiction is. Addiction is about feeding your pleasure centers in your brain. And that's why it is addiction under a scientific level,
Mm.
because with pornography, much like a gambler who has to bet 10 and then 50 and then 100 just to feel the same high, or the alcoholic who starts with beer, then moves to wine, then moves to hard stuff. With pornography, yeah, it starts out just simple enough as most normal guys watch pornography,
Mm.
but then it becomes more and more because it feels different in an addict's brain than it does in a regular person's brain.
Mm.
And there are people who can absolutely watch pornography without becoming addicted, just like there are people who can drink without becoming addicted.
Right.
But what happens in the mind of the addict, much like the person who's addicted to their telephone, is that you get that little hit of dopamine and oxytocin and serotonin and all those pleasure chemicals in your brain, and that's what you're striving for. That's what makes you feel good. That's what helps you cope in life. That's what makes you addicted on a purely scientific level.
Right. And so for an addictive individual, how would you say how would you say this person has to go about actually realizing and accepting that they actually have a problem, that it's not just pleasure anymore, it's about
Well,
something completely else?
I think most addicts understand they have a problem. Even if I didn't understand I had a problem with pornography, I knew that I used it differently than most people.
Mm.
I hid my use of it. I didn't talk about my use of it. I didn't want people to know about my use of it. I assumed that I used it a lot more than most people. And I think that what you realize also, along with being secretive and hiding and feeling shame, is that um, it's affecting you differently. You know that it's negative. You know that you want to stop. You make deals with yourself about stopping, but you can't stick to any of them. You know that it's an issue. You know that you're picking your addictive behavior over hanging out with friends or
Mm.
doing other things with friends. You're planning your day around your addictive behavior. It really is what rules your life. And there's a problem there. It's not a matter of not knowing. It's a matter of not being able to control it, not being able to rein it in. That's when I think you realize you have a problem, is when you can't control it.
Right. Yeah, I understand what you're getting at, and um, I do agree. Um, but just to continue playing a devil's advocate,
That's
because
okay. I
yeah,
like that.
yeah, I find it super fun. Because like personally, I'm a huge fan of working out.
Yep.
Like I work out every single morning, and I love it every single day. And that to me, I mean, I guess in a lot of ways when I talk to, because my parents is the same way, they absolutely love working out, and when we talk about it, everyone says like, yeah, we're completely addicted. A day without working out is horrible. Like if I don't work out in the morning, it's the day is ruined. And to me or to us or everyone else, it's just this haha, people laugh about it. And yeah, sure, you're addicted to working out. Good for you. Um, and so, what makes the difference between being self-described addicted to working out and the feeling of dopamine and everything else from working out? What's different? What's the difference between that and, in this case, being addicted to pornography?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you have to understand that there are good habits, there are
Mm,
bad habits, and then there's addiction. And what I would say to you is if you're at the gym, I'm sure you see a lot of addicts around you. There are
mm.
guys there who have body dysmorphia,
Yeah,
and
definitely.
and they will work out instead of going to work.
Mm,
They will work out before they hang out with their friends. Their entire life is centered around how they eat, what they're doing for exercise. Their quality of life is directly tied to working out. They'll do it 2, 3 times a day.
mm,
They'll go there if they're sick as a dog. They don't like Christmas because they can't go to the gym and work out.
mm,
They would rather work out than be with their family at Christmas. That's the kind of stuff when you start to recognize those things that you've actually got an addiction.
mm.
There's a great book called The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, and it's a fun read. It talks about how society uses habits, how individual uses habits, how businesses use habits. I urge everybody to read it because it helps you understand. You work out because there's nothing wrong with the dopamine rush. There's
Mm,
nothing wrong with getting the adrenaline rush. It's when that adrenaline and dopamine rush starts to affect your normal life in a negative way. If you have a girlfriend or a boyfriend and you're not spending time with them because you'd rather be working out, if you have kids and you're not hanging out with them because you'd rather be working out, that's an issue. And you go from having a bad habit to having an addiction. Um, and that's something that you do have to watch out for. I don't know what your frequency of working out is or how much it controls your life, but
mm.
that's the thing, is that it feels like this activity or this substance rules your life. It makes the decisions for you. It's in charge, not you. That's when
Right.
you reach addiction.
Okay, yeah, that's a good point, actually. That makes sense. Makes a lot of sense. Um, and so, sort of jumping a little bit, mm, you mentioned very briefly that your addiction personally affected your relationships and your overall life. Um, and a spontaneous question from that is, do you think that in a romantic relationship, do you think that porn can play a healthy role in a relationship? I, th- I, I assume you've kind of answered it already, but let me
Well,
hear your thoughts.
this is when people ask me, can porn be healthy in any
Mm,
aspect? Can porn be good? I point out two things. Number one, I have read dozens and dozens, if not well over 100, academic studies, and I'm like I said, I'm a research geek. I'm the
mm,
kind of guy who actually reads studies. I have read so many talking about the dangers of porn and the harm of porn, many of them in relationships. Um, a married couple that starts to watch pornography after they got married are 3 times more likely to divorce
mm,
than ones that aren't. Now, is that correlation exactly? I don't.
mm.
There's probably a problem anyway, and they're turning to porn,
Yeah,
but I have read, like I said, probably over 100 studies on porn that point out it's negative in so many different ways. I've never read a single study that says that it's a good thing or it's a
okay.
positive thing or it's a healthy thing. The other thing is that before COVID hit, as I mentioned, I did a lot of speaking at colleges. And I was at a college not far from my house. and I was meeting at the health center with about 12, 15 women. They invited me to come give a little speech about pornography. And towards the end of it, and these were women 18 to 22, and a couple of adults who were on the faculty, I believe. And one of these women, who was around 20 years old, said that she did not like to have sex with virgin men.
Hmm.
And I said, "So, okay, great. What does that have to do with pornography?" And she said to me, "The boys out there now, or the men out there now, they've all grown up on pornography, and
Hmm.
they've used pornography as sex ed. And you look at even the most normal, vanilla, average pornography, and the man is the aggressor against the woman. The man is saying horrible things to the woman. The man is holding the woman down. He's bending her like a mannequin in any position he wants. And that doesn't even talk about how things end in pornos. It's very degrading towards women,
Hmm.
usually how pornos end. And the thing is, you get these guys who start watching porn now at 11 and 12 years old, and this absolutely mainstream pornography is what they use at sex ed. And you watch these clips hundreds, if not thousands of times. By the time that you're actually with a real woman, you think that this is normal. You think
Hmm.
that this is what sex is. And when this woman in this health center at this group mentioned this, a lot of the other young women all nodded, and they were like, "Yes, yes." And we talked about it for a few minutes, and they don't want to be with virgin men because virgin men believe pornography is the way things are. And
Hmm.
and any of us who have had a healthy sexual relationship know that porn isn't like that. Pornography is not a documentary. Pornography is not a reality show.
Hmm.
Pornography is fiction. But most of these guys who have grown up in a world that they don't know a world before the internet. They're growing up on this, you know, unending access to pornography, and it's kind of screwing up their brains, and it's screwing up their expectations. And these women don't want to have sex with these guys because they don't want to have to retrain them. They don't want to have to teach them, no, you don't grab my throat. No, you don't call me a bitch. They,
Hmm.
it's one of these things that I think that this, more than any statistic out there, I think this illustrates what's wrong with pornography, is that it's poisoning the minds of a generation of young men who believe that having sex, intercourse, lovemaking, whatever you want to call it, is one thing when it's absolutely something else.
Hmm. Yeah, and when individuals as young as like 12, 11, 13, and so on first experience porn and then continue and so on and so on, sex in general, any mm, physical actions in a romantic relationship is very much is a taboo thing to talk about
Right,
in general. Like if you, I don't think most people can't talk to their friends or their even their parents or whoever it may be that's close to you about sexual experiences or thoughts or whatever it is. And that's obviously a problem because what happens then, at least in my mind, is that you will turn to other sources. And
right,
so, for example, porn. And I personally believe that that's the core of the problem because it's such a natural thing. I mean, sex, that's how you and me are alive. That's why we
right.
are on this earth today.
Well,
Yeah.
and that's what I tell people also, is that I'm not necessarily anti pornography. I am anti not educating your children.
Mm,
I am anti not educating our students in our schools. I don't think that letting kids know that pornography can be dangerous, can be addictive. I don't think that's part of the sex talk. I think that's part of the, you don't smoke when you're young talk. You don't
mm,
drink when you're young. When you're 18 or you're 21, you can make your own decisions. But when you're young, don't touch this stuff. It's not good for a young mind. It's not
Mm.
good for a young body. I don't want to outlaw porn because that would be ridiculous. Here in America, 100 years ago, we tried to outlaw alcohol, and it just didn't work. And because alcohol's been around since the beginning of time, much like pornography has. If you go into, caves in ancient Phoenicia, there was pornography on the walls that was drawn on the walls. If you go to a museum and you look at like Egyptian pottery that's 3,000, 4,000 years old, they painted some very dirty
Mm.
X-rated stuff on that on that pottery. You know, we have always had depictions of sexuality since the beginning of time, and I absolutely believe that people can look at it without becoming addicted, or at least a
Mm.
segment can look at it without becoming addicted. But it's really we need more conversations around healthy sexuality, because that's the road we're going down as a society, is we're becoming more unhealthy sexually. And we need to talk to our kids about that. We need to get over the shame of it. We need to get over the embarrassment
Mm.
of it and the judgment, because the thing is, like you said, we're all here because of sex. Sex
Mm.
is not a taboo thing. Sex is not a bad thing. Healthy sexuality is a wonderful thing. It's a thing to be celebrated. But unhealthy sexuality is not something that we are willing to talk about in our society, because it involves naked people, it involves sex, it involves masturbation, it involves all those things in the back of your mind that you may not want to talk about because they scratch a little itch you have that may not be mainstream or may not be something you want to talk about. But we have to recognize that the vast majority of people under 50 years old look at pornography and do masturbate to it. When I give presentations that are for a large group of men and women, one of the things I come out and I try to keep things light and keep things, I tell some jokes. I try to keep things, rolling. And the first thing I say is when I walk out is, okay, show of hands, who masturbates here? And everybody's just in shock that I come out and ask that question. And I'm like, oh, this is the audience that doesn't, because nobody is willing to talk about it. Yet, you know, when it comes to men under 40 years old, it's something like 80%
Mm.
masturbate. When it comes to women under 30 years old, something like 65% masturbate at least once a month to pornography. So
Mm.
pretending that none of us do it needs to be stopped in society. We just need to accept the fact that we're mostly all doing it, and we can have a conversation about it. We don't
Mm.
have to have a conversation about what we're looking at specifically and how, what the different acts are we're seeing on the screen. But the fact is, we've all seen it. We've all seen some extreme stuff. We most people have self pleasured or even self pleasure regularly. It's okay to admit that. Nobody's going to throw you into jail. It's
Mm.
okay to, be in the majority. It's okay to, I know it's a little bit embarrassing, it's a little bit taboo, but that's the problem. We need to start talking about this in society. We need to make it not taboo. And some of these statistics that, are really scary, especially for our younger people, we need to start addressing this, or we're going to have a very unhealthy sexual society, come 10, 20, 30 years from now.
Definitely. But so you speak of we have to make, basically in short, make it normal to speak of it. And that's a great that's a great thing to strive for, but it's easier said than done, obviously.
Oh, absolutely.
That's why we are here
It's going
today.
to take generations, and we're
Exactly.
at the beginning right now. But alcoholism, if you go back to the 1930s, that was looked at as a personality disorder, and they threw
Mm.
you into a sanitarium or a mental hospital because they assumed that, something was truly wrong with you on a level of being crazy. And we know that's not the truth now. In the, shortly thereafter, Alcoholics Anonymous started, and then, another 30 years later, the World Health Organization looked at it as a legitimate disorder and has learned more about it. And that's what needs to happen, is that we need more studies, we need it to be taken more seriously, and shows like you're doing now, discussions like we're having now, whether you have 100 people listening or 1,000 people listening or 10,000 people listening, hopefully these people are being exposed to some ideas that they will agree with, that they will recognize maybe they should work this into their life.
mm,
And that's how we do it. We do it at a grassroots level, one person at a time.
mm,
And that's how any change in the world happens. And this is something, like I said, we need to have changed, because if you look at the 18 to 30-year-old United States males, 18 to 30 years old, 32% report that they have either porn addiction or a problem with pornography. That's 1 out of 3 men in the US who think they have an addiction to pornography or a
mm.
problem. 1 out of 3.
That's a
What
lot.
happens? What happens if they don't get help?
Mm,
What happens if we don't start dealing with kids under 18 sooner? These guys are going to become 40 and 50 and 60, and the women are going to start catching up in numbers, because they are starting to catch up in numbers, because as it turns out, we're all sexual beings, and there's now more access to pornography than ever before. So some of these underserved demographics are now able to get their pornography, and we're going to have a very unhealthy society if we don't start talking about this
mm.
sooner than later. And that's why I'm out there creating resources and going on these shows, and
Yeah.
hoping that we can start talking about it, we can start dealing with our kids, and doing things healthy. I'm sorry that in 2020 we need to talk about pornography with our kids. My parents never did that for me back in the early 80s, but it's the way the world is now, and we have to respond to the way the world is and not just pretend it's not there.
Mm. Yeah, that's exactly why I'm doing this show, because I want to have conversations about things that you normally probably wouldn't have a conversation about, and to yeah, maybe, I guess my point is it's an interesting conversation that we're having, and so it is a problem. We have to deal with it. There's a lot of ways of dealing with a problem at this scale and this nuanced, because you could go about it just regulating so much of it in ways I don't know how to, but in some way or another. Um, how? Because people at very young ages, younger than they should, do take consume porn, obviously. How do we deal with uh, how do we deal with these individuals? Do we completely stop them, or do we rather teach them that this is not reality? It's fine that you consume it, but just know that it's not the reality.
Right. Well, as for government regulations, I'm not for that at all.
Hmm.
I don't, because number one, it's not going to work. Technology wise,
Hmm.
there are no borders in this
Hmm.
world.
Hmm.
There are places like India that have tried to clamp down, places like the UK, which are trying to make every porn site check that there's an 18-year-old on the other
Hmm.
end. This is not going to work, because the internet knows no borders. Anybody can get a VPN for free and
Yeah.
just skirt around what they're doing. And also, I don't think that filters on phones really do much. There are 4 billion smartphones in the world. Let's say that you lock down your kid's phone. Well, that's fantastic. There's still 4 billion smartphones in the world that they can look at, and their
Hmm.
friends might not be locked down. So I think that filters are really just for parents who want to feel like they're doing something and are afraid to have the conversation. What we need to do, and I feel horrible for anybody who has an addiction now. Um, for those 18 to 30-year-old guys, they're going to have to go one on one and deal with their addiction and enter recovery on their own.
Hmm.
I think what we need to do is start having age appropriate discussions with children. When your kid is 5 years old, you don't have to use the word pornography. All you have to let them know is that you don't look at what's under anybody's swimsuit, and you don't let anybody look under your swimsuit, and nobody takes pictures of what's under there, and you don't take pictures of anybody else under there. And
Mm.
you can leave it at that, because kids want direction. Kids want to know right from wrong. And as they get a little older, you can make it more, specific. When a kid is, we're giving kids who are 9 and 10 years old smartphones now. And you give a 10-year-old a smartphone, that's giving them the greatest porn computer that's ever been invented,
Mm.
and just saying, go for it. And what you need to do is let them know there are a lot of pictures out there that you shouldn't be looking at.
Mm.
If you stumble across some of these pictures, let me know. You shouldn't look at them, there for adults. And let that go at that. You don't have to make it scary. You don't have to make it shameful. And then at 13, 14 years old, especially with our males, I think what we need to start doing is talking about the danger of porn induced erectile dysfunction. It's known as PIED.
Mm.
And quick story, I do an advisement and coaching on the side with people. Last year, a guy, his name's Brian, came to me. He was 22 years old at the time, and he told me that he had started to have this porn induced erectile dysfunction. Now, if you have this, it can manifest itself in several ways. One, you just can't get an erection at all. Another way is that you just can't finish. Or another way, and this is what he suffered with, was that he could only finish to pornography. He couldn't finish in real life. And he had a girlfriend named Whitney, really cute, really funny 20-year-old girl. She was in school to be a nurse, and she knew about his porn addiction, and she understood the health ramifications. She understood it's a brain disease. She wanted to help him. Um, but the thing was, they would bring like a laptop into their bedroom, and he would have pornography playing on the table next to him so he could finish. And she didn't, ultimately she didn't like that, because she felt like a third wheel.
Right.
And so she came up with a concept to have him in the bedroom on his laptop computer, and she would be in the living room on her telephone, and they would have a sexting session back and forth through
Mm.
FaceTime or whatever it was they were using. And something in Brian's brain made him think that this was pornography because it was on a screen.
Mm.
So when they got to the point that he was about to, finish, she would run in from the other room, and they would finish like normal people.
Mm.
And that blows my mind. This poor kid is 22 years old. His girlfriend is 20, and he can only have an orgasm if it's somehow pornography related. And I think that if we tell our 13 and 14-year-old boys about this, they may not use so much pornography. Because, think back to yourself at 13 or 14 years old. Ultimately, you wanted a girlfriend.
Mm.
Ultimately, you didn't want to become a porn addict at 13 or 14, even if you were looking at it. But at 13 or 14, you understood you were probably still several years away from being with a real girl. But that's what you wanted. But you would take what you could get in the moment with pornography.
Mm.
And what we need to do is essentially alert these 13 and 14-year-old boys that if you watch too much pornography, there's a good chance that your penis will stop working correctly.
Mm.
And I think, and people say, well, won't that scare them? And I say, I hope so, because it's not that you're lying. This stuff really exists. Uh, Porn induced erectile dysfunction is hitting guys in their late teens and their 20s more than it ever has in history. And I think that if, we can let our 13 and 14-year-old boys, who we've already talked to about pornography for the last 6, 7 years, hopefully, if we can let them know about porn induced erectile dysfunction, and I think that's an appropriate age to share that
Mm.
information with, you know, hopefully they'll make the right decisions. My parents didn't talk about pornography with me, but they talked about cigarettes, they talked about hard drugs, they talked about things that I didn't use, or if I used them, I was 18 and I experimented once or twice and then stayed away from it. I don't think it's realistic to believe a kid will never look at pornography, or when they become older and on their own, they'll never look at it. But if we can educate them about the potential dangers, I think as a society, we'll largely be healthier in the long run.
Mm. And yeah, and but for these individuals that have already grown up, let's say they're in their 20s, early 20s, and they find themselves in a relationship with a partner, and they they finally accept or realize, I guess, that they have an addiction to porn. How does this individual go about dealing with it? I mean, the story you told is obviously one example, and that worked for this couple. And I'm sure every couple is obviously different, and
Right. Right.
every person will deal with it differently, of course. Um, just spontaneously, do you have any, I guess, direction on how a person would go about this?
Yeah, well, what we need to recognize with addiction, and this is addiction across the board, no matter what you're addicted to, addiction is usually a symptom of a larger problem. Addiction is usually not the main problem.
Mm,
With pornography addicts, 80% of them, or I'm sorry, 70% of them have had some kind of physical abuse in their life. 80% have had some kind of sexual abuse in their life. 95% have had some kind of mental or emotional abuse in their life.
mm,
When you factor this out, basically that means that somewhere between 85 and 90% of all porn addicts are dealing with unresolved trauma from earlier in their life. Now, I can tell you that the people who have been successful in recovery, like myself, and the people who I've witnessed, whether it be through these rehabs or people that I've met in different groups, the ones who are successful are the ones who go and get professional therapy and
mm,
find out how they became a porn addict. Because you just don't wake up in the morning and become a porn addict. You just don't wake up in the morning and become a drug addict. You find that you react to this substance in what your mind says is a favorable way. So you continue with it until it gets out of hand. And it's usually not until it's out of hand that you recognize you're an addict. Well, why did you become a gambling addict and I didn't? Why did I become, a food addict and you didn't? There are different things that went on early in our lives that need to be resolved. And when I started to do really intense therapy, I recognized, what happened to me when I was a kid, the stories that I told myself, how I started using pornography when I was young, along with alcohol as well, and what they did for me. And most addicts, they keep their lives very compartmentalized.
mm,
They have their family here, maybe their professional life here. They try to keep these things separate. And what's important to understand is that there is no separation in your life. Everything is intertwined, everything is connected. And when you recognize that, you can start getting to the core of the problem. And that's what I had to do in the first 2 years of recovery. Boy, they were hard. They made me angry. They made me sad. They made me frustrated. It was tough.
mm,
But here I am now, 6.5 years later, and I am physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually healthier than I've ever been in my entire life. My relationship with my kids, my relationship with my wife or my parents is healthier than it's ever been because I went back and I dealt with that trauma. I got through it. I worked to figure out what it was. I worked to get over it. And when you get over it, you never fully get over it, but when you get through it, when you understand it, when you deal with it, you don't need that crutch like you used to.
mm.
And when people say, how do you stay away from alcohol? How do you stay away from pornography? I tell people I still get triggers now and then, but the further away I get from it, the easier it is because I dealt with that trauma. I
Mm,
used porn and alcohol as medicine for that trauma. And
mm,
I don't need that medicine anymore because that trauma isn't there. So I always tell people who are addicted now, get into help. There are these groups, these red pill groups and these no fap groups, and even some of the 12 step groups that basically it's just about white knuckling. It's just about stop using and reset your brain. Well, you
mm,
can't reset your brain from stuff that happened when you were 13 years old, and formed basically your personality and how you think and how you behave. Yeah, you can stop the behavior, but that doesn't mean you're not an addict still. You need to go in there and really root around and get to the basic issues of what's happening and how it became that way. So, yeah, anybody out there who's listening to us, if you think you have any kind of problem with any kind of addiction, get yourself into professional therapy. Deal with people who went to school for a long time to help you deal with this. Deal with people who have worked with, hundreds if not thousands of other people just like you. In addiction, we all like to think we're unique snowflakes and my story's different and I'm the one who can't be fixed. Well,
mm,
that's just not true. And these people who are professionals know how to do it much better than you can do it on your own.
mm. Yeah, and or not recently, a few months ago, I spoke to an individual that was a recovering drug addict with various kinds of substances. And what he said about his recovery and his addiction reminds me a lot of what you're talking about, because it's not the actual addiction that's the problem. The problem is something completely else. You're just turning to this substance in that case. um, and in his case and also in your case, what helped was to talk about it, to
Yeah.
inform your closest friends and family and so on, that I have a problem and I need help. um, that's such a courageous thing to do, and it takes a lot of, you need to really build up the courage to say something like that. Not everyone can do that. So how does, or why, I guess is a better question, why is it that it's so shameful, or people at least think it's so shameful, to have an addiction to something that causes problems for them?
I think it's a few things. With pornography addiction, a lot of people, a lot of partners, and I do work with a lot of partners, they say, oh, well, my addict says he doesn't want to talk about it because he knows it will hurt me. And I think that's an excuse. And I try to, that's not an excuse. He knows that his behavior hurts you.
Mm,
And all addicts know that their behavior hurts the people they love. They're ashamed of their behavior. They're ashamed that they're not strong enough in their mind to not have to do this. They're embarrassed. They don't want to ask for help. They also worry about what their life looks like after they're not addicted anymore,
mm,
or when you remove this substance. Because here's the thing, pornography and alcohol always made me feel good. I could go to it, I always knew it was there. Yet if you take these two things away from me that I know help me, that I know make me feel better, that, like I said, were almost my medicine, well, what is my life like after that? It's scary to not know. So even just going and asking for help, well, if you get that help, you're taking this away from me. And how do I live after that? That's a scary proposition for a lot of addicts. And, I think that especially when it comes to something like parents, your parents never hoped you were going to be an addict. Your
mm,
parents hoped for you to have the best life possible. I think you know that this is a little bit disappointing. It's a little bit embarrassing I was a guy in my mid 30s who had to go to my parents and tell them all this stuff. And it's like, what kind of a guy in his mid 30s needs to go and ask his parents for help? Well, the
mm,
thing is, a healthy guy does.
mm,
And it's absolutely scary to do it, but you only have to do it once. And here's the thing, if your parents or your partner or brother or sister, if they look at you and go, "Well, you're a mess. I don't want to deal with you," then you walk away. That's all you have
Mm,
to do is walk away. The support of others is what got me through. My wife not judging me helped me get through. I tell anybody, what I tell parents and partners, the two things you need to do when somebody comes and tells you they're an addict is to, number one, make a safe space. They need to know that they can talk to you about this. They need to know that nothing bad is going to happen to them. And then number two, don't judge. If your boyfriend or your husband comes to you and says, "I've been looking at porn with old ladies in it," okay, that's a little outside the norm. You may think that's
mm,
weird and disgusting. Don't tell them that. Don't judge them on what they're looking at. Hopefully they don't tell you what they were looking at. Hopefully you don't ask exactly what they
mm,
were looking at, but try not to judge them. Everybody's different. This person has a problem. Help them with the problem. The specifics of it don't really matter. And because if you start judging, if you start shaming, if you start embarrassing, they're going to clam up. Why would
mm,
you share with somebody who makes you feel bad about yourself?
mm,
And I think that's why so many people don't ask their loved ones for help, is that they fear they're going to make them feel worse about themselves than they already do.
mm.
Yet the people who do go ask for help, they'll tell you vastly the people in their lives who love them still love them. They want to
Yeah.
help. They want to do whatever they can. They may not be educated to it. They may not understand addiction, but they do want to help.
Mm. And the point you touched on just now is, to me, super important because an addict, I mean, I don't have any kind of personal experience with addiction, even in my own life or people close to me. So I'm very, I guess, fortunate in
Well,
that
they're
way.
probably just hiding it very well.
Probably that's maybe the case. But and when a person comes forward and say that they have an addiction problem, a lot of, or I guess the initial thought of that individual with a problem um, probably thinks that everyone is going to judge me as an addict. I am an addict. And to me, that's not right. It's so wrong because and you're the individual is not an addict. It's a person with a problem that has turned into addiction. It's not an addict, it's a person with a problem. And that to me is so important to make a point out of because I feel like, or at least my impression is that a lot of people identify this or these individuals as addicts, not people.
Right. And I try to one of the things I try to push is that addict is just a label. It's just a
Mm,
title. There is no blood test for being an addict.
mm,
Uh and it's if you don't want to call yourself an addict, fine. Say it's an obsession. Say it's a
mm,
bad habit. Say it's a hobby gone horribly wrong. Whatever
mm,
you want to call it, doesn't matter what you call it. And you talk about talking to people. If you can't talk to your family first or your loved ones first, find somebody who is in recovery who you can talk to. The thing that I do the most with my coaching or advising, I only deal with people usually about 6, 7 times, and then they go off and get real therapy. A lot of them are just
mm,
scared to enter therapy because they've never talked about this. And they come to me, and I'm the first person who has a porn addiction they've ever openly talked to.
mm,
And they feel like they're not alone for the first time. And I don't care if they tell me what they looked at or they don't tell me. I don't care what they looked at. I've probably seen just about everything myself. And I don't care what happened to them when they were young. I'm not going to judge them on that because I had some horrible stuff happen to me.
mm,
And I know how it takes over your life. And just the ability to open up for the first time means so much to so many of these men and women who contact me who were just, they've never talked to somebody who had a similar problem because it's not like alcoholism where you can just go out to the bar or the pub and
mm,
there are plenty of people around you who have the problem. or you're not going to a casino and seeing all kinds of people doing crazy bets who have problems just like you. You know, pornography and dealing with pornography is a solitary addiction. You know, you do it by yourself. And ultimately, you need to have somebody to lean on. And if it helps you to lean on somebody who's been there first, then talk to somebody like that first. Go to a 12-step group or go to a online forum and talk to people. Find somebody like me. We're out there who will talk to you about this stuff, because that will often be the first step people need. And after they realize, wow, I just talked about this stuff out loud for the first time and it wasn't that hard. And I'm an easy person to talk to about it. But you know what? So is a therapist. You're not the unique snowflake for a therapist. They've heard everything before.
Mm.
And you can the more you tell your story, the easier it is to tell your story. And it's one of those things where, you know, it's just a matter of how do you enter recovery. And that's what I push for every person who's suffering, is that you have to enter recovery. It doesn't matter how, find a way in. There are a
Mm.
lot of different ways in, whether it's reading or resources or talking to somebody or online or 12-step groups or therapy. Just find a way in. And once you find your way in, you can figure out the exact way to navigate it that's best for you, but just put your foot in the door and get in there.
Mm. And that's a great point to actually end this conversation on. I personally I could continue talking 24 hours longer, but I have a feeling a lot of people listening would not be very interested after 24 hours. Uh,
Probably not. They might need a nap.
Probably. And so, with that said, I'm sure you have something to promote, a website or anything similar.
Yeah, absolutely. On my website, recoveringpornaddict.com, I do have access to a lot of different resources and a lot of different modalities. So you can, if you think that just reading about it online is the way to go, you can do that. If you want to contact me, you can do that. I have 3 books out there about porn addiction. I write articles just about every day about it. So check out recoveringpornaddict.com. And I'm sure there's something there for you, that whether you're an addict, the loved one of an addict, or you just want to learn more, you'll find something there.
Mm. And you'll find a link to that in the description. And so,
Fantastic.
thank you so much for this super interesting conversation.
And thank you very much too. Like I said earlier, we're at the tip of the iceberg. We're at the starting line on this. And there are still a lot of podcasts, still a lot of people who are scared to death to talk about this, who want to pretend it doesn't exist. So, Jonathan, I got to give you credit for being willing to have the discussion, because still a lot of people aren't. And
Mm.
you've taught a lot of people something today, and a lot of
Thank you.
people will walk away learning something today. So, you know, I can share the message, but I need the medium. You're providing the medium,
Mm.
so you know, props to you.
No problem. I think it's super interesting.